Absolutely. I think one thing to clarify for people, because not everybody understands this yet, lead generation and demand generation are two very different strategies. And I think a lot of people still think of them as one and the same, just different terminology for the same thing. But the reality is, from a lead generation standpoint, basically your marketing programs are only focused on the 5% of companies that are currently in market, and you're using a push strategy. You're going out, you're asking prospects for a meeting, and you're trying to pull them into your sales process. So think about strategies like gating content, collecting those leads, calling them MQLs, passing them to an SDR. The SDR starts chasing them, trying to get appointments to hand to the sales team. The problem with that is the way that buyers in the B2B space are making purchase decisions today doesn't fit that model well anymore. In fact, 72%, according to Gartner, would prefer to have zero interaction with a sales rep during the entire purchase process. And they're making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're willing to engage with a sales rep. So you can see where the lead generation tactics have become less impactful because prospects are engaging much, much later in their decision process with that company sales team than they have previously. Demand generation, on the flip side, focuses on driving value, not just with the 5% that are currently in market, but also the 95% of companies that are not looking to buy right now. And so your marketing programs are focused on building brand awareness, credibility, and trust to create demand and ultimately capture it. And the flip side of that is it's a strategy where you're looking at it where you want prospects to ask you for a meeting when they are ready, knowing how they are buying today. Because if they're making up to 80% of that decision without that one-to-one connection with a sales rep, they're already at their short list by the time they engage, right? And you need to be in front of them long before they get there in order to have a shot at making that short list. And at the end of the day, it's about prospects inviting you into their buying process versus lead gen, where you're trying to pull them into your sales process.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I think I was saying something the other day about that only 5%, 5 to 7% of the actual market is ready to buy from you at any given time. So then the other 93, 95% are people that either are not problem aware, or if they are problem aware, they're not solution aware. They potentially don't understand what they need and how they need it. And it was really cool what you said there about adding that value. And I think that's important to kind of, and I like what you said as well about it's about them inviting you into their buying journey as opposed to you trying to pull them in to the situation. So what are some of the things that you do from a demand generation point of view that help people to go on that journey?
We look at demand generation and building out an engine as having three pillars. The pillars are strategy, content, and distribution. And to break that down a bit from a strategy perspective, and I feel like this is where a lot of companies fall short because they skip this step or they kind of skimp over it and don't do it well. But identifying an ideal customer profile that are ideally the best fit companies. And if you don't have that piece and you don't have it well defined, what happens is you build this demand generation engine where you're trying to be everything to everyone, which really works against you if you're in a really crowded market. For example, we do a lot of work in the HR technology space. There's 21,000 plus technologies out there. It's a very, very crowded market. So that ideal customer profile is really narrowing it down to say, okay, from a marketing standpoint, we are going to hyper focus on creating a message and marketing programs that target this audience. And we're going to show up where those companies tend to show up and the individuals in those companies tend to show up. So it starts to look like we're everywhere. Then we're going to develop a unique point of view framework. And this is kind of your story to challenge thinking. The unique point of view becomes really important when you have a technology or a product or service that isn't truly differentiated in the eyes of the buyer. Again, we see a lot of this in the HR technology space. certain features and functionality that companies will lean on aren't enough of a game changer for someone to be like, you're truly different and you all sound the same. And so if you frame up that unique point of view specifically for that ideal customer profile, you start to have a story that resonates with a subset of your total addressable market so that you can actually get some traction. And then, of course, you need a content marketing and demand generation plan, which is the blueprint of, okay, how do we go and we execute on this? That second pillar, content, it's looking at key topics. Again, hyper focus to that ideal customer profile, continually weaving your unique point of view framework into it. Content for each stage of the funnel and the different formats of content. So, like not everybody listens to a podcast. How do you take that content and repurpose it out, create bite-sized chunks, create blog posts, infographics, webinars, you know the drill. And then that distribution is really, we consider that a three-legged stool where it's how do you get that content out in front of your ideal customer profile, where they're at and where they're consuming information. So the obvious one is your website. How do you build out your digital footprint and your digital storefront? And with that, it's not about just having a website, but how do you make sure you have enough information for people to go deep on there? And what I mean by that is like, you might have a product insights portal where someone can come and think of it like a Netflix experience. They can come and choose which things they're interested in, but it's a rich amount of content for them to go in and really dig into your product and understand it. You're going to put things like content loops in there. So when people are coming and looking at your content, regardless of which stage in their decision process they're at, whether they're at the top of the funnel, middle, or bottom, there's loops in there. So they get done reading an article or they get done listening to a podcast, and it's like more content you might like. And you want them to continue clicking that infinite loop of content and going deeper into your content to kind of build that trust with your organization, rather than looking at one article, jumping back to Google and finding another company and digging into their stuff.